this is going to your uncle's house. Maybe you planted them. I find it weird. I don't understand why somebody would plant evidence that's leading to the direction of a.
I've never actually seen the actual location of the footprint in real life.
Yeah.
So I told investigators this, and I've never seen the actual blanket hanging in the tree. I've never seen that.
Right here where the ribbons are. Now, if you can look from the ground here to here is where the blanket was found, on that branch right there.
And this is the exact branch. So way higher than 5 feet in the air. It's actually over my head, so it's probably 6 feet. That one right there. It's draped over that branch.
Now, it's normal in any case that you're going to see a game of telephone where somebody says something and it gets repeated by someone else until the point where people think it's gospel. They think it's the truth. But of course, in this case, when you seem to have individuals using multiple sock accounts to push a narrative, it seems like we are getting this far more in Jack and Lily's case than what I've seen in any other case. So somebody introduces a narrative, and you get 3 or 4 sock accounts that share the narrative and confirm the narrative, and all of a sudden it's gospel. And people don't question it. And that's the thing that amazes me with this case. People just don't question some of the things that so obviously come directly from Daniel, or so obviously come directly from Malaya or Janie. Now, for months, the number one argument for the piece of blanket having been planted in the tree is because it was too high. It was like 6 foot or 5 foot high. It couldn't possibly get that high on its own. And there's a bit of confirmation bias because it seems like people prefer to pay attention to Daniel's account rather than actually pay attention to what Hayden said, who actually physically saw the blanket in the tree. Because you heard there on the DT show where Daniel actually admitted he never saw the blanket in the tree. He claims he never saw the blanket in the tree. He wasn't at the location where the blanket was found before the blanket was collected. So according to him, he doesn't know where the blanket was. But then you get both him and Janie very confidently doing that video for the DT guy, showing him the exact branch that the blanket was on. Neither of them are right. We have Janie not really understanding how search markers work and thinking that because they are on a branch in a spot, that must be the exact branch where the blanket was. We have Daniel, who I suspect just went looking for a branch that was nice and high, that would allow him to say, look, see how high it is? It was planted. It could also be that he looked at this image, saw that there was a horizontal branch and went, I'm going to find a horizontal branch somewhere that I can pass off as being the right one. I suspect that he just went for the most sturdy looking branch near those bits of tape and went, that'll do because that's nice and high. So I did discuss this in my live stream this morning, but I want to put it all together alongside the audio dispatch and what we have from the documents. So when I was doing it this morning, I had forgotten to grab any of the excerpts from the documents. So this way I'm putting it all together in one spot. Now what I'm actually going to start with is some excerpts from the dispatch audio. I'm going to play the dispatch when they basically say family members have found this piece of blanket. And I'm also going to play some dispatch from the following day in the afternoon, where someone once again finds the bits of rag that are on the ground where the blanket was found. And the discussion over that being, well, someone needs to flag this so that we don't keep having people coming back and saying, we've found something that could potentially be evidence. That shows us that actually where Janie's hanging onto the tree with the flagging tape in it and going, this is the exact spot where the blanket was found, Yeah, no, it wasn't, because the flagging tape was put on that tree the day after the blanket was removed. So when the flagging tape was put there, they weren't marking the location of the blanket. They were actually marking the location of T-shirts that were on the ground. But I'll explain that again more thoroughly after we listen to this dispatch audio.
Families brought us to a location there, not far away, that there's a piece of a blanket, which the mother says she believes it belongs to her daughter. It's just off the road here. I don't know if you do PU status, you'll see where Bravo 3 and Bravo 8 are.
Yeah, it'll be just off the Lansdowne Road, off of 289.
Did we say we found an article? Possibly. There's a couple other pieces of old clothing here. Pieces just torn, like pieces of rag, but there is a side of the road.
So that, of course, is the dispatch audio from May the 2nd, when the family have just found that piece of blanket in the tree. And you can hear quite clearly they're talking about that they found the piece of blanket. They also found some bits of clothing. There's no mention of the exact location of the pieces of clothing. He's just saying there are some here as well. But basically, we're hearing that they are rags, essentially. So now we have the dispatch audio from the following day, where someone has basically gone, hey, look, I found something. And this is where they discuss it being the location that they were at yesterday, and that, someone needs to flag it so that they know that it's been checked.
We're up just past our location. A lady dropped by and said she found a pink shirt and a blue shirt on the side of the road. You want coordinates so that you can see if you already have them from your team. Don't see flagging tape near it, but I can give you the coordinates and I'll take a picture for you. That is affirmative. That is correct. There's 3 pieces total. 2 plus up front there's a purple item. Good. We'll stay here and secure it. You can check. I don't know if we have a dog man nearby. And again, it already may have been phoned in.
Yeah, go ahead. Those pieces of cloth, that's what you and I went and with the dog yesterday there when the family brought us up there.
Okay, are you there with the Casera guys right now? I just want to let them know that we cleared that area already. We're good.
Yeah, I'm here with them, and we should probably just flag it. I don't have any flagging tape or anything, so this is what I think you called in again.
How about I'll find some flagging tape for you and I'll bring it up.
So you can hear here in the dispatch, first of all, it is the exact location of the blanket. They're saying, well, that's where the family took us to yesterday. Now, what they say is that this woman, said that she found a pink t-shirt and a blue t-shirt, but the searcher who's actually been there, who was there when they got the bit of blanket, says that they are pieces of cloth. But what you hear quite clearly is that, this is the location. There's no flagging tape here. So it needs to be checked out. And then the conversation goes from that. Oh, that's where we were yesterday with those pieces of cloth. We should probably flag it. So the pieces of cloth, the rags, weren't t-shirts for starters. This was just a misinterpretation by a searcher by the sounds of it, or a lady. We don't know if she was a searcher or just someone on that road. But essentially what we're getting from that is that flagging tape that Janie was pointing to, that went on that tree after the piece of blanket was removed. That flagging tape was put there to mark the location of the pieces of rag. Now, I need to, first of all, look at what's said in the documents, but I also believe that there's a huge assumption that's been made about these pieces of rag also, and I'll come back to that. Especially because I believe that the assumption that's been made also has a bearing on what we know about the piece of blanket in terms of its location. Now, I'm going to start with Hayden's statement because I personally think his is probably the most accurate. The thing is, thanks to Daniel's narrative, there seems to be this belief out there that Hayden had it really, really wrong. And yet, Hayden's the one who saw the location. He was there. He was one of the people that found the piece of blanket. So I'm actually more likely to believe what Hayden says than what Daniel says, when Daniel even admits that he's never been to the location, or he hadn't been to the location when the piece of blanket was actually there. But Daniel has basically crapped all over Hayden's account and said, Hayden's wrong. And people have gone, okay, yeah, we believe you. It's so ironic that people can see how much work Daniel's put into controlling the narrative and creating his own narrative. People can see how unreliable Daniel is in terms of telling the truth. But the moment they turn around and say, yeah, Hayden's wrong, or the moment he turns around and says Hayden's wrong, they go, yeah, Hayden. That loaned itself to a little bit of Monty Python there, because it certainly is a situation where so many people are being told something and going, yeah, we believe that, and not stopping to think about it for themselves. So let's look at what Hayden said, because it's very different from Daniel's account. He said the tree was a small bushy tree, more of an alder, 3 or 3.5 feet off the ground. Hung up like a bath towel, he described it as pink, fuzzy, girly blanket. It was located right on the shoulder of the road at the corner. Now, that's something that's been grossly overlooked. Why? Because I think a lot of people just weren't really paying much attention to the location of the blanket until Daniel and Janie came out on the DT show and went, look, here's where it is. Because they'd seen the flagging tape and decided to show people this is where the blanket was. So it's actually likely that that flagging tape, where Janie and Daniel are saying this is the exact location, isn't even quite in the location of the blanket. But I'll come back to that. Okay, so moving on from Hayden's account. Okay, so we have Hayley's account where she's saying the piece of pink blanket was on a tree with 2 bigger sized shirts on the ground just below. She goes on to describe the location, saying that it was at the end of a logging or ATV trail. And then she describes it as hanging on a branch. And she says she also believed the shirts were rags and didn't have anything to do with the blanket. So it sounds from Hayley's account that the shirts, or the rags, whatever you want to call them, were on the ground just below the blanket. But I will put a pin in that just for a moment. Okay, looking at Emily's account, she's got they saw kids' clothing hanging on a tree. And this has got people confused. But I'm going to come back and explain that in half a moment. Because you go further down and it says Emily said there were 2 shirts and a blanket. The blanket was hanging in a tree and the clothes were on the ground. Emily took photographs. They drove back and asked Malaya if the clothing belonged to the kids. Malaya said the blanket belonged to Lily, but the clothing did not. So this, to me, is a misinterpretation or a scribing error. Because I think whatever it was that she said in terms of they saw something hanging in a tree, it's quite clear that her actual statement, when she clarifies the individual items, she specifically says there were 2 t-shirts and a blanket. The blanket was hanging in the tree and the clothes were on the ground. So you actually have all 3 of them saying here the clothing was on the ground. You have the dispatch where they talk about the clothing or the rags being on the ground. You also have an acknowledgement from both Hayden and Hayley where they refer to the clothes as being rags. Now, the first thing I need to point out with all these statements is that they were made over a month after this happened. So you are going to get some discrepancies in terms of they're not going to remember completely their description of how things happened, but they're pretty close to giving the same story. Now, if they gave the same story, I'd be suspicious. but they all have slightly different versions of their story. But in essence, you have them spotting the piece of blanket in a tree, stopping, and then they also see the ripped, torn shirts on the ground. You have Hayden not really giving an exact location for the shirts. You have Emily saying that the clothes were on the ground. She doesn't say specifically where on the ground. You have Haley saying they were on the ground directly under the blanket. Now, the account from the person who was writing the report doesn't mention the clothing on the ground. They've obviously treated it as not so important, or Purple Curl has just left that bit out. But we have 3 accounts here from Friday afternoon where the clothing was on the ground, the blanket was in the tree. That's important because now we know that, first of all, the flagging tape was put there after the piece of blanket was removed from the location. So the flagging tape was not put there by someone flagging the piece of blanket. It was put there because there were rags on the ground that they wanted to flag so people didn't report them in again. We have the dispatch audio from the time that the flagging tape was put up saying, there are these rags on the ground, let's flag them. You have the accounts from Haley, Hayden, and Emily all saying these rags are on the ground. And then you also have the account of the blanket in the tree. Why is that significant? Because basically that flagging tape, that's just been put on a tree branch. That tree branch is utterly insignificant. It is not the location where the blanket was. It wasn't hanging over that flimsy branch. There weren't t-shirts hanging over that flimsy branch. That's just where flagging tape was put because it was sticking out enough to show people, yeah, this location has been searched. The whole point of flagging tape is to make sure it is super visible. So they put it where it's going to be easily seen. And you can see there that that branch hangs out more than all the other branches. It's easy to reach and it's visible. So basically, the reason the flagging tape is on that branch is because it is highly visible and also easy to reach when you're putting flagging tape up, because you can see that there's like a bank off that road that drops down. Now, just as an aside, something that I want to point out that I think is significant, because when you get people coming out in this case who are basically claiming to know something or have seen something, claiming to be witnesses when they're really not telling the full story, then when you come across something that shows that, they're not really telling the full story, it's probably a good time to acknowledge that. So what I'm talking about here, like I've just established, that flagging tape, that's not the branch that the blanket was hung over. It's also not marking where these t-shirts were hanging in a tree or anything. The t-shirts were on the ground, or the rags or t-shirts, whatever they were on the ground. We heard in the dispatch that basically they were on the ground. The rags were on the ground. We heard Emily, Hayden, all of them acknowledged that it was on the ground. The person that put that flagging tape in that tree was marking bits of fabric that were on the ground. Why is that significant? Because you have this Brandon guy that came out of the woodwork claiming that he saw these t-shirts hanging in a tree on day one. And he even did a video. And in this video, which I'm going to show you, he drives up to this spot, points to this flagging tape and says, that's right where they were. Because apparently he didn't listen to the dispatch, didn't realize that this flagging tape was put up on day 2. And yes, it marks the location of the t-shirts or rags or whatever they were, but it marks the location where they were on the ground. Were they in a tree at any point in time? The flagging tape is not marking that because the flagging tape was put there when they were on the ground. So it is not flagging a branch that had a blanket over it or a branch that had a t-shirt over it. It is simply a branch that was hanging out far enough to be highly visible so that people, if they came across those bits of rags, bits of t-shirt again, would know we don't have to call it in, it's already been marked. So I'll just play that little bit of audio and then I will go through the images that show you that neither Janie or Daniel have the faintest clue what they're talking about.
Day one right there. Right in that tree.
I don't know if someone put him up to it, but I feel a little bit embarrassed for him if they did. If he's doing a neater thing of just wanting to get attention, I still feel embarrassed for him. But let's have a look at these images. So we have Janie's image where she claims, right there, this is where the blanket was hanging. Well, you look at how flimsy that is, where those bits of flagging tape are. That blanket wouldn't hang in there anyway. And that doesn't look remotely like the location that we see on the photo from the blanket. Now, I was dubious when the photo of the blanket first came out because we weren't told its origins, so I ignored it until it was published by the Globe and Mail. And they said on there, provided. So that means it's been given to them either by Haley or someone or by the RCMP. Now, thankfully for us, there is a code of ethics for reporters in Canada, which sadly is lacking here in Australia. And I'm not sure if it exists in the USA, but there is a code of ethics, meaning they're not going to publish a photo if they've not verified it. They're not going to publish an AI generated image. So that tells us now that that is actual footage. That is the location of the blanket. Now we get Daniel showing us this location where this is, he claims this is, 6 foot, this is above his head, this is really high up. And he's holding this branch, this is where it is. Absolute certainty, even though he's said he never went to the location when the blanket was there, he never saw the blanket up in the tree. But according to him, it's super high up, it's like 6 foot in the sky, so it couldn't have possibly got there, the kids couldn't have put it there. Couldn't have come off the back of a truck or anything because it's far too high. And if we zoom in for a closer look, you can see it there again. There's lots of other tree trunks behind it, and it's actually not a very thick branch. It's got little narrow twigs coming off it as well, but that's significant. And I'll show you why in a minute, because when we start looking at the actual footage of the blanket, you'll see that this has got nothing to do with it. Okay, so I'm going to break this down in a moment with, I've got photos that zoom in particular areas. But first of all, you can see this doesn't look a bit like what Janie was pointing to or what Daniel was pointing to. For starters, it's not over a heavy branch, it's over a cluster of smaller branches like it is in a bush, like an older bush. Now you can see down near the bottom, there is a horizontal branch, but it's actually quite thick. And it certainly doesn't have any of those little twiggy bits coming off the side of it. It is much thicker than what Daniel was hanging onto. And also, what Daniel was holding onto was actually coming out towards him, whereas this one is pretty much horizontal. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. But even just looking at this, you can see it really is not the location that Daniel is pointing to. So I've put these up for you. You've got the blanket location on the left-hand side, obviously. You've got Daniel's location at the top, Janie's at the bottom. We can completely disregard Janie's because we know that's irrelevant. But if you look at Daniel's, you can see it is a quite narrow stick. It's got a few spriggy bits off the side, but it isn't in any sort of densely scrubby, bushy area. You can see behind it that there are a few tree trunks going straight up behind it. Whereas if you look at this bit of blanket, basically the way it hangs, there should be some really scrubby bits of bush that would obscure those bits of tree. So it's definitely not the same location. And of course, Daniel was hanging onto the bigger branch and saying, that's where it was hanging. Well, we can see that's not where it was hanging anyway, even if we thought for a moment that that really thick branch underneath it was the same branch. It's not hanging on it. So again, doesn't match at all. And the lower branch you can see is actually quite thick. It would be as thick as your wrist. So just a few things that were pointed out by people in my live stream this morning. That's ferns on the side there. And the type of ferns that you're looking at, they don't grow 6 foot tall. So even if Daniel was just, sort of slightly off in terms of looking at the branch, there's ferns there. So straight away, that brings it down closer to the height that Hayden was talking about. Hayden said it was around 3.5 to 3.5 feet. Now, something that someone else pointed out this morning, which when I was looking at it on my screen, when I was doing the live stream, it wasn't as big, so I didn't notice it. But someone made a comment that the branch or the log was on the ground. And I suddenly realized that explains why the piece of blanket flicks up like that. Because the piece of blanket is lying on the ground. The top of the blanket where it's slung over, that is probably your 3 to 3 foot off the ground that Hayden was talking about. But it looks to me like that actual log, branch, whatever it is lying on the ground. And that the piece of blanket is actually hitting on the ground, and that's why you see that bit heading off to the side. I was trying to explain it away, thinking it might have been caught in a bit of tree or something. Now, you can see it resting on a kind of a really thin bit of a branch, but to me, it still looks like it's on the ground. I might be wrong, and I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on that. But it really does look to me like the person who said this morning that that looks like it's on the ground could actually be correct, and that it's, not completely on the ground. You can see there's a little bit of darkness below that branch, but that essentially it is pretty much on the ground. It's not 6 foot up in the sky. And I think if you were to look at the length of the blanket there, if we could step out and get this in perspective, I think we would probably see that the top bit that's swung over probably is maybe 3 foot off the ground. It is hard to get a really good perspective because it's not a really, really clear image. But it certainly appears that when we zoom in, we can see that it really doesn't appear to be too far from the ground. We don't see other branches underneath it. We see what looks like the ground. Now, when I look at it from the Google Earth images, I can't readily see any fern or bracken or anything like that. But it definitely stands out to me that as you get higher up, the branches are far more sparse. And I believe that probably if we were to go there and have a look, that what we would find would be looking down below the level of that logging road, because you can see that it does dip down. So I actually think that what they've seen is a little bit lower down. They might not have seen the entire blanket from where they were, but it certainly wasn't 6 foot high. I have to say, it really, really amuses me that we've seen so many instances in this case where Daniel has made up a narrative, distorted a narrative, pushed a distorted or made up narrative. And yet, when he comes out with something and says it outright, like he did with this bit of blanket, people are more than happy to accept what he says, as opposed to what another witness has said to law enforcement. Because the thing is, the account that we have from Hayden, it's not Hayden going on someone's live stream and going, this is what I saw. The account we have from Hayden is him doing an interview with law enforcement and saying, this is what I saw. And I believe it was 3 to 3.5 feet off the ground. And yet somehow people have just accepted Daniel saying, yeah, it was 6 foot off the ground. And no one has pushed back and said, well, why are you saying that when Hayden has said it was 3 to 3.5 feet? Instead, we have Daniel doing his best to discredit Hayden, and the people around him doing their best to discredit Hayden. And Daniel basically going, yeah, Hayden doesn't know anything. And people just believe it. I think my question is, why did Daniel say that it was 6 feet off the ground? Is it because he looked at the photo of the blanket and went looking for a branch that he thought was, horizontal, so maybe that's the right branch? Or is it convenient for his particular narrative in terms of someone planted it to be able to say, well, someone has to have planted it because it was 6 foot off the ground? Because, like I said at the beginning of the video, one of the biggest arguments for this blanket having been planted is how far off the ground it is. No, it couldn't possibly have got there on its own, not 6 foot. The kids couldn't have put it up there. It couldn't have flown off a vehicle and got 6 foot high. And yet, if it was 3 foot high, or 3.5 foot high, as it appears to be in this image, in amongst these tiny, tiny branches in this bush, then that certainly changes the narrative in terms of what Daniel is trying to push. And of course, in terms of people claiming that the flagging tape marks the location of where the blanket was in the tree or the location of where t-shirts were hanging in a tree, we know that that flagging tape was put there on day 2 after the blanket was removed. And when we have all these accounts of the t-shirts or rags being on the ground, so that branch where the flagging tape was put has no significance whatsoever, other than it was the best location to put flagging tape to make it visible. Easiest to reach, most visible. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there. I'm very keen to hear your thoughts on this. So thanks for listening. Please remember to hit the like button. That helps me get this out there into the algorithm. Also, please do leave a comment. I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on this. And if you're new, please do subscribe. So on that note, thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.
I've been to